David had been walking alone for hours through the silent ruins of the alien temple. The air was heavy and still, the kind that made every small sound feel loud and dangerous. He could hear the crunch of dust under his boots with each step, and the echo of his own breathing seemed too loud in the wide stone hallways. The walls were covered in strange carvings, shapes and symbols he could not read, but they seemed to watch him as he passed. He had come to this planet, looking for lost technology, maybe old treasure, maybe something to sell. But now, he felt like he had stepped into a place that was never meant for human eyes. At the end of the long corridor, he found a great round chamber. It was darker here, with only a faint blue light spilling down from cracks in the ceiling. Dust swirled slowly in the air, moving like ghosts around him. David's eyes followed the faded designs on the walls, until they stopped on a large set of double doors at the far side. The doors were half open, and a strange golden light pulsed from the gap between them. It was not the flicker of a torch, not the steady glow of any machine he knew. It was alive somehow, moving like it was breathing. Cautiously, he stepped forward. The moment he pushed the doors open wider, the golden light burst out like a wave, bathing the whole chamber in warmth. He raised his hand to shield his eyes. When he lowered it, his breath caught. Standing in the center of the glowing light was a young alien woman. Her skin was the color of a summer sky, smooth and shining, marked with delicate glowing symbols along her arms and face. Her long black hair fell over her shoulders in wet strands, as if she had just stepped from water. She wore a flowing dress of soft fabric, pale against her blue skin, tied at the waist with an ornate silver belt. Around her neck was a chain of gold beads, and her wrists were bound by heavy steel shackles that connected to the floor. Her eyes locked onto his, and David felt a strange pull. They were bright, glowing faintly like molten gold, and filled with something between fear and desperation. Then, she spoke, and the sound was soft but clear. "Please, let me be your wife, human, or I will disappear forever." David froze in place, his mind stumbling over her words. He did not know her, had never seen her before, and yet she spoke as if this was a matter of life and death. He opened his mouth to ask what she meant, but the ground beneath them began to tremble. The golden light flickered, dimming, and her body started to blur, like mist being blown away by wind. The woman gasped and reached out. Her chains rattled as she pulled against them, her hands stretching toward him. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "I don't have time to explain. Just say yes, or I will vanish." David stepped closer without thinking, his instincts kicking in. Her fading form made something inside him panic. He reached out and took her hand. Instantly, her image grew solid again, and the golden light flared bright. She let out a deep breath, her shoulders shaking as if she had been holding it for too long. You stopped it," she whispered, almost to herself. David frowned. "Stopped what? Who are you?" She shook her head, her eyes darting toward the walls where the golden light met the shadows. "It will come back," she said, her voice trembling. "The ones who hunt me, they are close." David felt a chill run down his spine. "What is going on?" he asked, but she only looked at him with an expression that made his chest tighten. It was the look of someone who had nothing left to lose. "My name is Lyra," she said, "and you are the only one who can save me." From somewhere deep within the temple, a low, hollow sound echoed. It was like the voice of the earth itself, cold and empty. The woman flinched, gripping his hand tighter. "They are here," she whispered, her golden eyes wide with fear. David glanced toward the doors, wondering if he should run, but something in the way she clung to him stopped him from moving. Every instinct told him that if he let go, she would vanish, just as she had warned. And somehow, he believed her, even without understanding why. The golden light around them began to swirl, lifting tiny specks of dust into the air. It felt warm against his skin, but he could sense that it was also fragile, like a bubble that could burst at any second. Lyra's voice cut through the heavy silence. "If you walk away now, I will fade into nothing, and they will take me forever. David's throat felt dry, his mind full of questions. But there was no time to ask them. The low, hollow sound grew louder, and the shadows at the edge of the light started to move, twisting like living smoke. Lyra's eyes locked on his. Once more, please, human, she said softly. Choose me, or watch me disappear. David's heart pounded. He knew that agreeing to her request could mean stepping into something far beyond his understanding, but he also knew that walking away would mean letting her die, or worse, letting her be taken by whatever waited in the darkness. The moments stretched out, his grip on her hand tightening, and then, with a slow, steady voice, he said, "All right, I choose you." The golden light blazed, swallowing the chamber in brilliance. The shadows hissed and pulled back, and for the first time, Lyra smiled, but in her smile, there was not only relief, there was also something else. A secret she had yet to tell. The golden light still shimmered faintly around them, but David could see it was already fading. Lyra's hand trembled in his, though her grip was firm, as if she feared letting go for even a second. Her golden eyes studied him with a mix of hope and sadness. "You have chosen," she said softly. "Now, I can live." For a little longer, David's brow furrowed. A little longer. What does that mean? She didn't answer, instead glancing toward the doors where the shadows had been moments ago. "They will come again," she whispered. "They never stop." David looked around the chamber, searching for an exit that wasn't blocked. There was a narrow archway to the right, half hidden behind a carved pillar. He motioned toward it. "We can talk later. Right now we need to move." Lyra nodded but didn't release his hand. The chain around her wrists clinked as she stood, the metal heavy against her slender arms. David examined the shackles, old iron, cold to the touch, but strangely strong for their age. He tugged at them, but they didn't budge. "They can only be removed in the heart chamber," Lyra said quietly. "Until then, they will follow me wherever I go." They stepped through the archway, their footsteps echoing in the narrow corridor. The air here was cooler, and the walls seemed closer together. David's flashlight beam danced over carvings of figures, kneeling before tall, faceless beings. He didn't like the way those faceless shapes seemed to lean toward the kneeling ones. Lyra walked close beside him, her head lowered, as if she was afraid to look at the walls. He noticed the faint glow of her skin dimming, and it made him uneasy. "How did you even know I was here?" he asked. Her answer came after a long silence. "I have been watching you," she said, "from far away." Through the pools, David frowned. "Pools? They are like windows between worlds," she explained, her voice low. "I was shown many faces, but yours was the only one I could trust." David almost laughed. "You trust me without even meeting me." Lyra's eyes met his, and he saw no hesitation there. "Yes," she said simply. "Because you protect others, even when there is no reward." Her words left him silent for a moment, but then he shook his head. "You still haven't told me why you need me to be your wife." The last word felt strange on his tongue. Lyra's steps slowed, and her gaze fell to the ground. "If I tell you everything now, you might leave," she said, her voice almost breaking. "And if you leave, I die." They reached the end of the corridor, where the walls opened into a small chamber. A broken skylight above let in thin beams of pale light. Catching in the dust, David scanned the room. No shadows here, at least for now. He guided Lyra toward a flat stone bench along the wall. She sat slowly, the chains clinking again. David leaned against the opposite wall, arms crossed. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. "But you can't keep expecting me to walk blind into this." Lyra looked up at him, her lips pressing into a thin line. Finally, she spoke. "My people are bound by the first law," she said. "It says that once every century, a daughter of our blood must bond with someone from another world." David tilted his head. "Why?" "To keep the balance," she said. "If the bond is not made, the collectors come for us. They take the one who was chosen, and they do not return." Her voice shook at the last words. David thought about the shadows he had seen. And you were chosen this time. He guessed. Yes, she whispered. But I refused to bond with the one they picked for me. David's eyes narrowed. So they're punishing you for it? Lyra nodded slowly. They call it fate. But it is a chain as heavy as these, she said, lifting her wrists slightly. I would rather fade into nothing than belong to someone who sees me as property. David stepped closer, crouching in front of her. But why me? Her golden eyes met his again. Steady now, because you are not from my world. And yet you fight for those who are not yours, she said. I saw it. I watched you save a child on your colony station from a burning transport, even though you didn't know her name. David's jaw tightened. That was just the right thing to do. Lyra's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. Exactly. Before he could reply, a cold wind swept through the chamber, though there were no windows open. The faint golden glow on Lyra's skin flickered. Her eyes darted toward the corridor they had come from. They're close, she whispered. David's pulse quickened. Then we need to keep moving. She stood, and once again her hand found his without hesitation. They slipped out through another archway on the far side, this one leading into a winding passage that seemed to slope downward. David could feel the walls vibrating faintly, as if something heavy moved in the distance. As they descended, Lyra leaned close and murmured, "The promise you made in the chamber. It is stronger than you know." David glanced at her. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer, only squeezed his hand tighter. The shadows were coming again, and there was no more time for questions. The air in the passage grew colder with each step. David could feel it against his skin, like invisible fingers brushing his arms. The faint vibration in the walls had turned into a low, steady hum. It made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Lyra's grip on his hand tightened, her golden eyes flicking from side to side. "They are close now," she whispered, "closer than before." David glanced over his shoulder. The corridor behind them was swallowed in darkness. His flashlight beam barely pushed the shadows back. And as he moved it, he swore the darkness shifted, pulling away from the light in slow, curling shapes. He didn't like that. It was like the darkness itself was alive, watching, waiting, keep moving. He said quietly. Lyra nodded, her steps quickening, the chains on her wrists rattling with every stride. The passage bent sharply to the left, opening into a wider hallway. Here, the walls were carved with more alien symbols, but these were different. They seemed more violent. Sharp angles, twisted figures, shapes of tall beings standing over smaller ones. Some of the carvings showed the smaller figures bound in chains. David didn't need to understand the language to know what the carvings meant. "This place gives me the creeps," he muttered. Lyra's voice was low. "These halls were made for the collectors." David shot her a quick look. "You mean they built this?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "It was built to hold them." Before David could ask more, a faint sound drifted from behind them. It was soft, like a whisper carried on the wind. Then another, louder, more like a hiss. The hum in the walls grew sharper, almost like the sound of something scraping against stone. "They've found us," Lyra breathed. David didn't waste another second. He pulled her forward into a run. Their footsteps echoed down the long hallway, the sound chasing them as much as the shadows. The glow on Lyra's skin began to brighten again as they ran. David noticed that when her glow flared, the shadows seemed to hesitate, pulling back slightly, but the effect didn't last long. The darkness pressed forward again. "How far to the exit?" David asked between breaths. "There is no exit." "This way," she said. "Only the outer ring." David cursed under his breath. "So we're running in a circle." She nodded. "We must reach the heart chamber. Only there will they fall back." The sound behind them grew louder. Now there were distinct thuds, like heavy steps. David risked a glance back and saw something that made his blood run cold. From the darkness, tall, shadow-like figures emerged. They were shapeless, yet somehow solid. their bodies shifting like smoke in a wind that wasn't there. Where their faces should have been, there was only blackness. Yet he could feel their eyes on him, piercing and cold. "They're faster than I thought," Lyra said urgently. David pulled her toward a side archway, hoping it would give them another path. The archway led into a small chamber with a domed ceiling. A broken skylight above let in pale daylight. David turned to block the doorway. The shadows stopped just outside the light from the skylight. They swayed there, their forms shifting and curling like snakes. "They can't step into the daylight," David said in relief. Lyra shook her head slowly. "Not for long. The light here is weak." She pointed to the floor, where thin cracks ran between the stones. Through them, the darkness was already seeping, reaching toward them like black liquid. David looked around the chamber for another way out. There was a narrow stairway in the far corner, leading upward. He grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her toward it. They climbed quickly, the sound of the shadows slipping across the stone floor behind them. The stairs ended at another corridor, this one brighter, with patches of daylight spilling from cracks in the ceiling. The collectors stayed back for now, but their shapes still hovered at the edges of the light. "They're waiting for the dark to return," Lyra murmured. David kept moving. "Then we don't give them the chance." As they walked, David noticed Lyra's breathing was quick and shallow. The glow on her skin flickered again, dimming. "You're getting weaker," he said, concerned. She shook her head. "Not weaker. The bond is still forming." David frowned. "And if it doesn't form completely?" Her eyes darkened. "Then the shadows will take me, and they will take you too." That thought sent a cold shiver down his spine. The corridor ended in a massive stone door. It was covered in intricate carvings, and at its center was a circular mark, glowing faintly. Lyra stepped forward and placed her chained hands on the mark. Golden light spread from her touch, and the door began to tremble. But the sound echoed down the hallway, and David knew the collectors would hear it. "Hurry," he urged. The glow brightened until the door cracked open, spilling more golden light into the corridor. But even before they could step through, the darkness surged forward from both ends of the hall. David grabbed Lyra and pulled her inside. The moment they crossed the threshold, the golden light flared and the door slammed shut. The air inside was warmer, calmer, but David knew they weren't safe yet. Lyra's voice was soft but determined. "They will not stop, and the deeper we go, the harder they will fight to reach us." David nodded grimly. "Then we make sure they never do." The golden chamber was wide and silent. Its walls shimmered faintly, like sunlight caught in frozen water. Strange symbols glowed softly across the curved stone. They pulsed in slow rhythms, almost like breathing. David felt the warmth in the air, and realized it was coming from the light itself. It was nothing like the cold, lifeless corridors outside. Here, the air felt alive. Lyra stepped forward slowly, her eyes scanning the symbols as if she knew every one of them. The chains on her wrists dragged across the floor, their metallic scrape echoing in the stillness. "This is one of the inner chambers," she said quietly. "They were built to keep the darkness out." For a time, David followed her gaze, noticing that every symbol on the walls matched the glowing marks on her skin. "Those marks," he said. "They're the same as these." Lyra nodded without looking at him. "They are my bond marks." David frowned. "Bond marks." She turned toward him then, her golden eyes steady. "When the bond begins, it leaves its mark on both souls," she explained. "It ties life to life. Neither can exist without the other." David took a step closer. "You're saying if one of us dies, the other follows," she finished softly. The truth hit him like a heavy weight. This wasn't just a strange request in a temple. His choice had already tied his life to hers. David rubbed his forehead, frustration and disbelief mixing together. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Lyra's expression didn't change, but her voice softened. "Because you would have walked away," she said. "And if you had walked away, I would be gone." He couldn't argue with that. She was probably right. Still, The idea that his fate was now tangled with hers made his stomach twist. "You keep saying bond, but you also called it marriage," he said. "Which is it?" Lyra gave a faint smile, but it wasn't one of amusement. "In my people's law, they are the same," she said. "A bond is not just a promise, it is the sharing of a single existence." David paced a few steps outside the door. He could almost feel the collectors lingering in the dark. The walls here kept them away, but he knew it wouldn't last forever. "So this bond," he said, "why me? You could have chosen someone else, someone who knew your world." Lyra shook her head, her voice low. "I watched many," she said. "Some were strong, some were clever, but none of them had what you have." David raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" She met his eyes. "The will to protect without demand." Her words brought back memories he hadn't thought of in years. Pulling strangers out of wrecks, giving away supplies he barely had for himself, taking risks no one asked him to take. He didn't do those things for reward, but hearing her say it still caught him off guard before he could respond. The chamber's light dimmed slightly. Lyra looked around sharply. "They're pressing against the walls," she said, testing the seals. David glanced at the door. The thick stone seemed solid, but the glow along its edges was flickering. "They can't get in, right?" he asked. "Not yet," she answered, "but the longer we stay still, the stronger they become." She walked toward the far end of the chamber, where another doorway stood half hidden behind a column. "This leads deeper, closer to the heart chamber," she said. David followed, but his mind was still on her earlier words. "So if this bond is life and death for both of us, how do we finish it?" Lyra hesitated at the doorway. "It must be done in the heart chamber," she said, "before the light there fades for the century." They stepped into another hallway, this one narrower, but lined with more glowing marks. David noticed her skin glowing brighter here, as if the walls were feeding her strength. "What happens if we don't get there in time?" he asked. Lyra's voice was firm but heavy. "Then the bond remains incomplete, and the collectors will drag us both into the void." The passage sloped downward, the air growing warmer. It was almost comfortable, but David knew it was a false safety. He could still hear faint scraping sounds far behind them, like claws over stone. "Do they ever stop?" he asked. Lyra shook her head. "They are bound to the first law as I am," she said. "They cannot be reasoned with. They only take." They reached another set of doors, smaller than before, but marked with intricate carvings of two figures, standing back to back. Lyra placed her hands on the symbols, and once again golden light spread from her touch. The door opened with a soft rumble, revealing a room filled with a faint golden mist. It swirled gently, and David could feel its warmth, even from the threshold. "This is a safe room," she said. "We can rest here for a moment. Inside." They sat near the center where the mist was thickest. For a while, neither of them spoke. David stared at the golden haze, his mind heavy with the weight of what he had learned. Finally, he broke the silence. "If I walk away now, if I break this bond, what happens?" Lyra's eyes met his, and there was no hesitation in her voice. "Then we both vanish," she said simply. David leaned back, exhaling slowly. He didn't know if this was fate, chance, or a trap, but either way, there was no turning back now. The golden mist drifted lazily around them. It was warm and soft, like the air after sunrise. For the first time since meeting Lyra, David felt his muscles relax. His mind, however, was still restless. He sat with his back against the wall, eyes on the faint shimmer of light above. Lyra rested nearby, her head slightly bowed, as if listening for something only she could hear. Then, without warning, the mist shifted. It swirled faster, curling into shapes that had no place in a safe room. David straightened, his hand instinctively reaching for the small blade at his belt. The golden haze thinned in front of him, and from it stepped a figure tall, shrouded in flowing black. Its form was human-like, but its edges rippled like smoke. Its face was hidden behind a smooth, dark mask, with no eyes, no mouth, only emptiness. Lyra's eyes widened. "Collector," she breathed, her voice tense. David rose to his feet, keeping himself between her and the figure. "I thought they couldn't get in here," he said. "They can't. Unless they choose to speak," she whispered. "This one has come to bargain." The figure's head tilted slightly when it spoke. Its voice was neither loud nor quiet. It was simply there, in David's mind. "Human, you have bound yourself to her." David's jaw tightened. "Not by choice. And yet you hold her hand, follow her steps, risk your breath." The voice murmured, "You could let her go now, and walk away with your life." David didn't move. "What do you want?" he asked. The figure's presence seemed to thicken the air, making each breath harder. "Release her," it said. "Break the bond before it is sealed, and you will be rewarded." "Rewarded how?" David's tone was flat. "Wealth beyond your world's greed. A ship that could cross galaxies in a blink. Safety from all who would harm you," the voice listed, each word a whisper of temptation. Lyra's grip on David's arm tightened. Her voice was low, urgent. "Don't listen." The collector's mask turned toward her. "If he chooses to keep you, your light will fade, and when you fall, so will he." David stepped forward, narrowing his eyes. "And if I refuse, then your end will be hers." The voice answered without hesitation. "One life, one death, one void." The silence that followed was heavy. David could almost feel the weight of the choice pressing against his chest. The thought of freedom, of walking away, alive and rich, was tempting, dangerously tempting, but every time he looked at Lyra, he remembered the fear in her voice when she said she would disappear. He remembered the way she fought to hold on, the way she chose him not out of convenience, but out of trust. He shook his head. "No deal." The air seemed to shift. The collector's form darkened. "You choose ruin," the voice said, almost as if amused. "I choose not to be a coward." David replied sharply. The figure stood still for a moment, then its head tilted again. "Very well, human. But you will wish you had listened." The mist around them rippled, and the figure stepped back into it, vanishing without sound. The golden haze slowly returned to its calm drift. David let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Lyra's shoulders sagged with relief, but her eyes still carried worry. "You refused them," she said quietly. David gave a short nod. Seemed like the right thing to do. Her gaze lingered on him, and for a moment, her expression softened into something close to gratitude. But it didn't last. Her voice turned serious again. "They will not stop now. They will push harder. They will use the shadows in ways you haven't seen yet." David glanced toward the far wall, where the exit door stood. "Then we'd better keep moving before they do." They left the safe room, stepping back into the narrow passage. The air outside felt heavier now, as if the collector's presence had lingered in the stone. The golden light from the walls was fainter here. David noticed Lyra's glow dimming too. "You're weaker again," he said. She shook her head. "It's not weakness, it's the bond, pulling at both of us." David frowned. "You said the bond protects us." "It does," she said, "but until it is complete, it will test us, and them, as they moved deeper into the passage. The faint hum of the walls returned. This time, it was sharper, almost like a warning. David kept his knife ready, his eyes scanning the shadows ahead. Lyra walked close beside him, her chains clinking softly in the distance. He saw a faint golden glow, another chamber, but this light was different, stronger, almost pulsing like a heartbeat. "That's the way to the heart chamber?" David asked. Lyra's lips curved faintly. "Yes, if we can reach it before they catch us." He didn't need to ask who they were. The sound of scraping stone had already started again behind them. David's grip tightened on his blade. "No stopping this time," he said. Lyra nodded, her eyes fixed on the light ahead. Whatever waited in that chamber would decide not only her fate, but his as well. Asterisk. The heartbeat-like glow at the end of the passage grew brighter with every step. David could feel the air pulsing with it, like invisible waves rolling through the corridor. The sound of scraping stone behind them was louder now, faster. The Collectors were not just following, they were hunting. Lyra's chains rattled as she moved, her steps quick but unsteady. David kept a firm grip on her arm, half guiding, half pulling her forward. "They're closing in," he said, glancing back. The shadows were already spilling into the far end of the passage. Moving like a living tide, they twisted and swirled, their faceless forms stretching unnaturally long to reach toward the light ahead. Lyra's voice was calm but urgent. "If they reach us before the bond is sealed, they will tear it apart, and us with it." David tightened his jaw. "Then we run." The floor beneath them shook, as if something massive had struck it from below. Dust fell from the ceiling. Drifting through the golden light, Lyra stumbled, and David caught her before she hit the ground. She was breathing hard, her skin's glow flickering like a candle in wind. "You're fading again," he said, worry slipping into his voice. "It's the bond pulling at me," she replied. "It knows the end is near." They pushed forward, the golden glow ahead spilling into a wide circular archway. The moment they stepped through, David felt the warmth surge around him. The heart chamber was vast. Its high domed ceiling glittered with thousands of tiny golden lights. Like stars trapped in stone, the floor was smooth, marked with a single, large symbol in the center. It pulsed in the same rhythm as the glow on Lyra's skin. "This is it," she said softly, "the place where the bond will complete." David moved toward the center with her, but a deep, cold voice filled the chamber. "You will not leave here alive." From every shadow along the walls, the collectors poured in, their forms stretched upward, towering like pillars of night, their faceless masks tilting toward the pair. David stepped in front of Lyra, his blade ready. "You'll have to go through me first," he growled. The voice laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. "That is the plan." The collectors surged forward, their dark limbs whipping out like tendrils. David slashed at the nearest one, the blade passing through its smoky form, but slowing it enough for Lyra to move. "Get to the center," he shouted. Lyra darted toward the pulsing symbol, her chains scraping against the smooth floor. Two collectors blocked her path, their forms shifting to close the gap. David charged after her, ramming into one of them. The cold from its body sank into his skin, biting deeper than ice. But he didn't let go until Lyra slipped past. She reached the symbol and dropped to her knees, placing both chained hands on it. The moment her skin touched the glowing mark, a shockwave of golden light spread across the floor. The collectors hissed and drew back, their forms writhing as the light burned into them. David stumbled toward her, his chest heaving. "What now?" he asked. "Stand with me," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "If you're not here, the bond cannot seal." He stepped onto the symbol beside her. The golden light rose up around them like a wall. Outside it, the collectors circled, pressing against the barrier, testing for weakness. Lyra turned to face him, her eyes glowing brighter than ever. "From this moment," she said, "we are one life, one breath, one fate." David swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. "Then let's finish this," he replied. She reached up and placed her hand over his heart, her other hand she set against his cheek. The glow from her skin poured into him like warmth after endless cold. David felt his own heartbeat match hers, their breaths falling into the same rhythm. The golden light surged upward, shooting into the dome above, like a beam to the heavens. The stars in the stone ceiling flared, flooding the chamber with light so bright, the shadows screamed. The collectors thrashed against the barrier, but every surge of light pushed them farther back. One of them shouted in that cold, mental voice, "This is not the end, human. We will find you." David ignored it, his focus on the woman in front of him. Lyra's markings blazed, the chains on her wrists glowing white-hot, before shattering into dust. The fragments scattered across the floor like tiny sparks. Her body seemed lighter now, the strain in her face melting into relief. The final wave of light burst from the symbol beneath them. It swept across the entire chamber, slamming into the collectors and scattering them like smoke in a storm. The last echo of their voices faded into silence. David lowered his hands slowly, the glow fading from his skin. Lyra looked at him with a small, tired smile. "It is done," she whispered. "We are bound. Nothing can break it now." He took a deep breath, letting the quiet sink in. Outside, the darkness might still wait, but for the first time, they had a fighting chance. David glanced around the chamber, then back at her. "So, what happens now?" Her smile grew just a little now, she said. "We live." The golden glow in the heart chamber slowly dimmed, the light no longer blinding, but warm and steady. David stood still for a moment, letting the silence settle. His breathing slowed, his heartbeat matching Lyra's without effort. It was strange, this feeling like he could sense her thoughts without her speaking. Not words exactly, but emotions, images, a quiet pulse in his mind that was hers. Lyra rose to her feet, her bare wrists free of chains for the first time in years. She looked down at the shattered fragments of metal on the floor. They glittered faintly in the golden light before fading into nothing. Her eyes lifted to meet David's. "You carried my burden without knowing its weight," she said softly, "and you chose not to let go." David gave a small shrug. "Guess I'm stubborn like that." A faint smile curved her lips, but it was tinged with something deeper. Gratitude, maybe even affection. They stepped away from the center of the chamber. The great symbol beneath their feet was still glowing faintly, pulsing in time with their steps. David glanced around, half expecting the collectors to return. But there was no movement in the shadows, no whispers in his head. "They won't follow us here again," Lyra said, sensing his thoughts. "At least, not for a long time." The doorway they had entered through now glowed with a softer, more inviting light. Lyra walked ahead, her hand brushing along the carved walls. David followed, still adjusting to the strange awareness that linked them. Every time he looked at her, he felt not just what he saw, but a shadow of what she felt. Relief, exhaustion, and underneath it all, hope. He wondered if she felt the same from him. She glanced over her shoulder and gave a small nod, as if answering the question he hadn't spoken. They stepped into the outer corridor. The air here was cooler, but the heavy, suffocating darkness was gone. The faint carvings on the walls seemed softer now, their edges no longer sharp and threatening. David took a deep breath. "It feels lighter," he said. Lyra's voice was gentle. "The heart chamber's light reached here. It will keep this place safe for many seasons." They moved through the winding halls, their footsteps echoing less harshly than before. For the first time, there was no rush, no desperate race to outrun the shadows. Still, David kept alert. Old habits didn't die quickly. When they reached a tall archway opening to the outside, he paused. The alien sky spread before them, painted with streaks of gold and deep purple. Two suns hung low on the horizon, their light soft and warm. "It's beautiful," he murmured. Lyra stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "This is the first sunset I've seen in freedom," she said, her voice almost a whisper. They descended the stone steps leading away from the ruins. The ground was covered in strange flowers that glowed faintly in the fading light. Each step away from the temple felt like peeling off another layer of weight. David glanced back once, the distant spire of the heart chamber barely visible now. A part of him still expected to see dark shapes lurking there, but the ruins stood quiet, wrapped in gold. As they reached the base of the steps, Lyra slowed her pace. David looked at her. "What is it?" She turned to face him fully. "In my people's way. The bond we made is not just survival," she said. "It is a promise to walk together. Wherever the path leads." David held her gaze for a moment. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. Her eyes softened, and she reached up, touching the side of his face lightly. Through the bond, he felt the warmth of her trust, the quiet relief that she didn't have to run alone anymore. The two of them began walking toward the horizon. David wasn't sure where they would go. Back to his ship, maybe to a settlement where she could start a new life. Or maybe they'd keep moving, seeing more of this strange world before deciding. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt open, wide, and waiting. A gentle wind carried the faint scent of the glowing flowers. Somewhere in the distance, a bird-like creature gave a long, echoing call. David smiled faintly. Guess we're really doing this. Lyra tilted her head. Doing what? Living, he said simply. She let out a quiet laugh, a sound he realized he had never heard from her until now. It was soft, musical, and it stayed in his mind long after. As night began to fall, the flowers brightened, casting a path of pale light ahead of them. The bond's quiet hum between them was steady, a reminder that they were no longer two separate lives. Whatever waited beyond this world, danger, adventure, peace, they would face it together, and somewhere deep inside, David knew that this choice, the one he made in a burst of golden light, would shape everything that came next.